she found a shelter dog with a mysterious scar. What it led to was unimaginable. Most shelter stories start the same: abandonment, rescue, maybe a second chance. But this one began with a scar, a jagged mark tucked high on a German shepherd's shoulder, like a wound too personal to forget. Emma, a behaviorist, noticed it during a routine check, but something about that scar lodged itself in her memory. Days later, she remembered a soldier, Nolan. He once told her about a dog who saved his life, then disappeared in a blast overseas, a dog with a scar just like this. She couldn't believe it. Not yet. But the deeper she looked, the more the evidence refused to stay buried. And when she finally brought Nolan into the shelter, what happened next wasn't just a reunion. It was a moment that silenced an entire building. One command, one sprint, one sob from a man who hadn't cried in years, and a dog who had finally come home. The desert sun had not yet reached its zenith, but the air over Red Ridge Rescue Center already shimmered with the kind of heat that made bones ache and tempers tighten. The wind carried dust, whistling between rusted fence links and faded banners that flapped wearily above the shelter's overcrowded entrance. Inside, the sounds of barking echoed in dissonant waves, sharp, restless cries of over 70 dogs crammed into kennels meant for half that number. Miriam Sloan, the shelter director, stood just inside the intake corridor, her arms crossed and jaw tight. Sweat curled her graying hair at the edges of her forehead. Her phone buzzed with unanswered calls. A clipboard dangled from her fingers, filled with names, medical codes, and far too many red marks. Every day now felt like a triage unit in a war zone, and today was no different. "Animal control's back," someone called from the front desk. Miriam turned just as the side doors swung open and Officer Ramon Silva stepped in, lugging a battered carrier crate. It was old, its latches rusted, the kind the city should have replaced years ago, but funding was always just out of reach. "I hope that crate's empty," Miriam muttered, knowing full well it wasn't. Silva gave her a look. "You're going to want to see this one." He crouched and unlatched the door. What emerged, or rather, what didn't, was a stillness that drew attention like a vacuum. Inside the carrier, curled so tightly it looked more like a skeleton than a creature, was a German shepherd, male, maybe 3 or 4 years old. But it was hard to tell beneath the layers of grime, scabbing, and the gaunt outline of ribs so sharp they looked like someone had carved him from driftwood. Miriam's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. Dear God! His collar, military green nylon, had embedded into his neck. Tufts of fur were gone. Infected welts surrounded the area like a cruel ring of thorns. The smell of rot, infection, and long-standing neglect rose as Silva carefully slid the dog onto a wheeled stretcher. "Foreclosed property," Silva explained. "Outskirts of Apache Junction. House had been empty for months. He was in the backyard, living off a broken irrigation hose. No tags, no microchip. I think he chewed through wood to get out of a shed." The dog didn't make a sound. He didn't even tremble. He just stared ahead with glassy amber eyes, like the gaze of someone who had watched the world die slowly and decided not to blink. "Has he moved at all?" Miriam asked. "Not since I put him in the crate," Silva replied. "Didn't growl, didn't whine, just curled up. Miriam bent low, making sure to keep her hands visible, voice steady. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now." The dog flinched almost imperceptibly, not at her voice, but at a soft clank from the metal tray nearby. "No name, huh?" murmured Sophia, one of the vet techs who had stepped in to help. She frowned, scanning the intake sheet. "We'll log him under Unknown Shepherd Intake 23A." Miriam straightened. "No," she said, after a pause. "Log him as Ghost." Sophia looked up. "Ghost? He's here, but not really." Miriam's voice was quieter now, like he left himself behind somewhere else. Ghost was wheeled straight into the quarantine unit. No kennel was ready. There hadn't been an empty one in days. So they cleared out an overflow laundry room, set up makeshift gates, and laid down thick bedding. Dr. Angelina Rayan, the shelter's lead veterinarian, arrived 10 minutes later. One look at Ghost, and she let out a slow, tight breath. "We're going to need sedation for that collar," she told Sophia. "It's fused with granulation tissue. No way we're removing it while he's conscious." It took 3 people and a mild sedative to get Ghost onto the exam table. The entire time, he didn't struggle, didn't growl, didn't even blink at the needle, just let his body be moved like an empty shell. Angeli examined him thoroughly. Body condition score, 2 out of 9. Severe dehydration, multiple open wounds, both ears infected. He's covered in pressure sores and hookworms likely untreated for months. Miriam stood in the corner, arms crossed, lips pressed together. "I've seen neglect," Angeli added, "but this isn't just that. He's absent." Later, when the collar had been removed and the wound treated, Ghost was gently moved to a vacant kennel deep in the behavioral isolation wing. He didn't resist, but as soon as the staff backed away and the gate closed, he went rigid. He slunk into the farthest corner, pressed his emaciated body into the steel wall, and did not move, not even to eat, not even to drink. In the staff kitchen that evening, over microwaved leftovers and cold coffee, the conversation drifted again to the German Shepherd in Kennel B. "I don't think he's just afraid," said Kayla, a junior assistant who had been working night shift and monitoring the cameras. "I watched the overnight feed. He paces in tight circles, clockwise, then counterclockwise, over and over." "Anxiety behavior," Sophia said. "Maybe," Kayla replied, "but he stops sometimes, just stands there, like he's listening for something." "Listening for what?" Miriam asked, already knowing the answer would unsettle her. Kayla hesitated, then said quietly, "Like he's waiting for someone." There was a long silence before Miriam finally spoke. "Put him on the list, Friday." By Monday morning, the name Ghost had already become shorthand among the shelter staff. A whisper passed between vet techs and volunteers in coffee-stained scrubs. No one called him by his intake number anymore. It felt wrong. Numbers belonged to inventory. Ghost wasn't inventory. He was a presence barely there, but unmistakable. In Kennel 14, Ghost hadn't moved since they'd placed him there 2 nights ago. The fresh blanket beneath him remained untouched, except for the indent of his sunken body. His eyes, those deep amber eyes, tracked nothing. Not the shift in light through the small barred window, not the food tray that slid under the kennel door at 6 a.m., not the quiet attempts from staff to coax him forward with bits of cooked chicken or soft words. Nothing. He simply existed, curled, silent, waiting. In the clinic office, Miriam Sloane stared at the whiteboard. Names and statuses were scribbled in red, blue, and black, adopted, pending, hold, and at the very bottom, a separate list, small but final. A column labeled Pre-Youth. Angelina Rayan entered behind her, carrying a tablet, exhaustion shadowing her almond-shaped eyes. "You saw the video from overnight?" Miriam asked. Angeli nodded. No change, no movement. Miriam didn't turn. "I keep hoping to hear something else." Angeli slid the tablet onto the desk between them. "He hasn't touched food in 36 hours. Water? Only when the room is empty. I check the cameras myself. He waits until everything is still, then he moves 3 feet at a time, pacing, pausing, pacing again. That's textbook hypervigilance." "And the wounds?" "Responding to antibiotics, but slowly. He's still septic. That collar damage went deeper than I thought." She hesitated. "I ran his blood panel again. His cortisol is off the charts. That's not just stress. That's long-term trauma, Miriam. Chronic. He's been living in fight-or-flight mode for months, maybe longer." Miriam sighed, her fingers tightening around a coffee mug she hadn't sipped in hours. "What about behavior?" Angeli shook her head. "Kels tried again this morning." Kelsey, their in-house behavioral specialist, had joined Red Ridge just 6 months prior, fresh from a trauma-informed animal psychology program. She was young but sharp, and she'd built rapport with hogs others had given up on. Pit bulls with a past, hounds born in fight rings, even a Doberman who once lunged at shadows. But not Ghost. Inside kennel routine, Kelsey crouched near the gate. She kept her body low, her hands still, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, buddy. My name's Kelsey. You don't have to come out. I just wanted to sit with you." Ghost didn't move. She placed a piece of warm turkey on the rubber mat, then backed away slowly. She waited 10 minutes, then 20. Her legs cramped. Her patience didn't. Still, Ghost didn't budge. She opened a small notebook and wrote with careful strokes. Attempt before. No response. Eyes open. No eye contact. Trembling. No aggression. Full shutdown. She slid the note under the door of the clinic office, then leaned against the wall in the hallway outside Ghost's kennel. Miriam picked it up an hour later. Read it, folded it slowly. By mid-afternoon, the shelter was buzzing with the movement. Volunteers walked dogs, answered phones, cleaned up after lunchtime feedings. But behind the closed door of the clinic office, a more difficult conversation was unfolding. "I'm not saying it lightly," Angeli said, "but you know our policies." Miriam sat across from her, arms crossed, a crease deepening between her brows. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days, won't make eye contact, won't accept human presence. He's shutting down, and if he shuts down any further, we risk him hurting himself." "You think he's dangerous?" "I think he's traumatized beyond what this environment can help. And we're full, Miriam. We've got 6 dogs stacked in crates waiting for open runs. You saw what happened to the Dobie last week, internal fight injuries, after 5 days in overflow." Miriam didn't argue. She didn't have to. They both knew the numbers. The space, the budget, and the weight of choosing who got a chance and who didn't. "What if it's not about recovery?" Miriam asked quietly. "What if all we can give him is rest?" The room fell silent. Then Angeli spoke. "That would be mercy, but it can't be guilt-driven. We make that call together." Miriam reached for a black marker and walked to the whiteboard. Below the list of pending cases, under a fresh date, she drew a line, and beneath that she wrote, "Ghost hold until Friday." Late that evening, Kelsey returned to Kennel 14. The hallway was quiet now. The floors had been mopped, the overhead lights dimmed to save power. She sat cross-legged just outside the kennel. Didn't speak, didn't move. She placed another bit of chicken on the mat, closer this time. Ghost didn't touch it, but his ears twitched. Barely, once. It wasn't progress, not by the textbook, but it wasn't nothing either. Kelsey stayed an hour, then left, whispering a single line over her shoulder. "I'll be back tomorrow. You don't have to come to me, but I'll be here." Inside the kennel, Ghost didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward the sound of retreating footsteps. And somewhere inside that battered body, something barely audible shifted. The shelter at night was a different world, stripped of noise, urgency, and light. The concrete walls, usually pulsing with movement, now absorbed the stillness like a cathedral long abandoned. In that silence, Red Ridge didn't feel overrun or overcrowded. It felt forgotten, ghost-like even. In the security office, just past midnight, the only glow came from the row of monitors stacked above the desk. Grainy black and white footage fed live from the cameras positioned throughout the facility. Kennels, corridors, quarantine bays. Kayla Jennings leaned forward, elbows pressed into the desk, eyes locked on the screen for Kennel 14. She'd been watching Ghost's camera every night since he arrived. Not because she was told to, because something about him wouldn't let her look away. He was moving now, not far, not frantic, just pacing. His body, still skeletal beneath the recovering fur, moved with precision-tight clockwise circles, no more than 3 strides in radius. Then a pause, a slight head tilt toward the gate. Then again, counterclockwise this time, circle, pause, circle, again. He never barked, never whined, never looked up, just circled like he was caught in a loop only he could see. Kayla reached for her notepad. She'd begun tracking his patterns out of curiosity at first, but lately it felt like something deeper. The pacing always began after 11 p.m. and ended before 4 a.m. Always when the humans were gone. Always when the world had fallen into sleep. She scribbled a note, night. 3, same pacing. 42 minutes, no eye contact with camera. Circle pause pattern consistent. Did not touch food, still refuses water if human scent near bowl. Her pen hovered for a moment before she wrote the next line. Pattern is not random. He's not trying to escape. He's waiting. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, not afraid, not hiding, waiting. The next morning, Kayla stood outside Miriam's office, fidgeting with the zipper of her hoodie. Her graveyard shift had just ended, but she'd waited until Miriam was back at her desk. The door was half open. "Hey," she said, peeking in. "You got a minute?" Miriam looked up from the intake forms. Her eyes were already tired. "Yeah, come in." Kayla stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She wasn't normally nervous talking to the director, but something about this felt bigger. "I've been watching Ghost overnight feed," she said, "every night." "I know," Miriam replied. "I've seen your notes. Detailed." Kayla hesitated. "Yeah, but there's something I didn't put in the report." Miriam raised an eyebrow. It's the pacing. It's not random anxiety. It's rhythmic, controlled. And every time he stops, he looks toward the kennel door. That could be food expectation, Miriam offered. I thought so too, Kayla nodded. But he only eats when the room is empty. And even then, he sniffs it first, then backs away like he's checking for something else. Miriam leaned back. What do you think he's doing? Kayla paused, then said it aloud for the first time. I think he's waiting for someone. The silence between them stretched. He doesn't behave like a Kayla added, or like a dog who's always been afraid of people. He behaves like a soldier left behind, like he's watching the door because part of him still believes someone's coming. Miriam closed her eyes for a beat. The words hit harder than she'd expected. She thought about the collar military green, the scar tissue that had formed beneath it, the unflinching stillness, the way Ghost never cowered. He endured quietly, like it was all routine, like he'd done this before. At noon, the staff gathered in the admin lounge for the weekly behavioral update. The air smelled of wet kibble and industrial-strength disinfectant. Folders were stacked high. Clipboards clicked. Conversation buzzed. But at the center of the table was the inevitable, the list. No one wanted to write. Pre-euthanasia candidates. Miriam flipped the page on her clipboard. Ghost, she said quietly. No one interrupted. Angeli cleared her throat. Medical progress is limited. Wounds responding, but behavior is flatlining. No forward progress in response. Won't eat in company. No interactive response to humans. No approach, no aggression, but no survival engagement either. He's not aggressive, Kelsey added, almost as if to defend him. But he's not connecting, and we're out of room. The silence pressed heavier this time. Miriam nodded slowly. Okay, I'll mark him for Friday. Are you sure? Kelsey asked, her voice soft. I'm not sure about anything, Miriam said. But we've got 6 more dogs coming in this week. 3 of them are bonded pairs. We can't justify holding a kennel indefinitely for a dog who won't let anyone in. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she pushed through. We'll keep trying until then. Kelsey's jaw clenched. Can I have until Friday to try something different? Miriam met her eyes. You have until Friday, but after that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. That night, the shelter was quiet again. In Kennel 14, the pacing resumed. Ghost moved like a shadow one that had learned the shape of loneliness too well. The circles were slower now, deliberate, as if each step were a measure of memory, and in the corner of the hallway, just out of frame, a pair of eyes watched him through the glass. Kayla sat with a blanket draped over her knees, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She didn't take notes tonight. She just watched. And somewhere in the silence, she whispered to herself, maybe to him, whoever you're waiting for, I hope they find you before Friday. The desert wind stirred gently that morning, bringing with it the faintest scent of sagebrush and something older dust, maybe, or memory. Emma Callahan stepped out of her car with a bundle of old blankets in her arms and a quiet tension in her chest she'd grown used to over the past few months. She paused for a moment outside the chain-link gates of Red Ridge Rescue Center, staring at the peeling white sign. It had been her mother's shelter once, not legally, of course, but emotionally. For nearly a decade, her mother had volunteered here every Sunday, like clockwork, folding laundry and walking dogs no one else wanted to touch. Emma remembered coming along sometimes as a teenager, sulking in the back seat, rolling her eyes while her mother chirped about second chances and souls with fur. Now, her mother was gone, and this was all Emma had left. A few thick wool blankets and the faint smell of lavender clinging to their folds. She pressed the call button at the front desk and waited. A woman in a staff t-shirt, mid-30s, with a clipboard and the kind of efficient smile worn thin by compassion fatigue, buzzed her in. "Hey there! Donation drop?" Emma nodded. "Just blankets from my mom's closet. She used to come here years ago." The staffer looked up, surprised. "Name? Margot Callahan." The woman's smile softened immediately. "Oh, Margot. Yeah, I remember her. She always brought peppermint tea for the volunteers. We still talk about that." She glanced at the blankets. "Thank you. Really?" Emma offered a small, polite nod, already turning to go. But before she could, a voice from the far side of the room called out, "Would you like a quick tour?" Emma turned. A man, maybe early 40s, was wiping his hands on a towel. His shirt read Mike, weekend supervisor. "I don't want to be a bother," Emma said. "Not at all," he replied. "We've made some upgrades since your mom's time. If you've got 10 minutes, I'd be glad to show you around." She hesitated. She hadn't come for this. She hadn't come for anything but closure. But 10 minutes wouldn't break her. "Sure," she said. The main adoption wing was warm with afternoon light, filtering through high-set windows, rows of kennels line at each wall, each occupied by eager eyes and hopeful tails. Puppies barked, wagging so hard they knocked over their water bowls. Older dogs wagged more cautiously, noses pressed to the bars. Mike explained the layout as they walked, adoption ready on the left, medical monitoring on the right, behavioral isolation in the back. Emma paused now and then to speak softly to the dogs who pressed closest, offering quiet, instinctive greetings. None of them stirred anything in her except a mild ache, like hearing a sad song on a day already overcast. When they reached the far end of the corridor, Mike slowed. "Past this point is the medical recovery ward," he said. "Not all the dogs there are adoptable yet. Some are still being evaluated. Some are long shots. You don't have to go in if you're not up for it." Emma tilted her head, curious. "Is it okay if we take a quick peek?" Mike looked at her, searching for hesitation. When he saw none, he nodded. "Just don't touch the kennel bars and stay back from the doors. Some of them don't respond well to interaction." They entered through a sliding door, and immediately the air changed, cooler, quieter, tinged with antiseptic and something heavier, a stillness that only lives where pain lingers long. Mike guided her down a narrow corridor. He paused outside one kennel, glancing toward the back where shadows pooled in a corner. "This one is different." Emma followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing, just darkness. Then her eyes adjusted, a shape, curled tightly, still as stone, a German shepherd. His coat was patchy and dull, ribs visible beneath it. His head rested against the far wall, his body pressed so deeply into the shadows it was like he was trying to disappear. "He's been here a few weeks," Mike said quietly. "Found abandoned behind a foreclosed property. We don't know the full story, but he won't let anyone near him. No growling, no barking, just shuts down." Emma took a half step closer, then stopped. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear, not even pity, recognition. She didn't know why, but something in the curve of his spine, the angle of his ears, the way his eyes flicked open amber, dull, but tracking her, sent a shiver down her spine. "What's his name?" she asked, her voice low. We call him Ghost," Mike said. "Figured it fit. He's here, but not really." Emma stared at him for a long moment. She felt the urge to speak, to offer a word of comfort, but instead she surprised herself. She sat right there on the floor outside his kennel, cross-legged, her back against the opposite wall. Mike blinked. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, I just want to sit for a second." He looked uncertain, then said, "All right, I've got med rounds. I'll come check in 15?" She waved him off gently, eyes still on the figure in the shadows. "Take your time," she murmured, not to Mike, to the dog, to Ghost. He didn't move, but he didn't look away either, and for the first time in weeks his eyes didn't dart with panic. They stayed, watching, flickering, almost curious. The corridor in the medical wing of Red Ridge Rescue felt quieter than the rest of the shelter, not just because of the insulation or the limited foot traffic, but because of something else. A weight in the air, a hush, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Emma remained seated on the cool tile floor, legs crossed beneath her, palms resting loosely in her lap. She didn't know what had made her sit down. It wasn't impulse. It wasn't obligation. It felt more like instinct. Like something in her body had recognized something in his before her mind could catch up. Across from her, on the other side of the kennel bars, the German shepherd remained curled into himself. His back was partially turned, but his face just barely angled toward her. The shadows inside the kennel played tricks with shape and definition. If you weren't looking for him, you might have missed him entirely. But Emma's eyes were locked, not out of fear, not even fascination. It was something deeper, a pull she couldn't name. Then he moved. Not much, just his eyes. Amber, faded, like burnished copper dulled by time and trauma. For half a second, no more, they met hers. And something subtle, almost imperceptible, flickered behind them. Not trust. That would be too generous. Not recognition. That would be too hopeful. But awareness, a fragile acknowledgement. "You're there? I see you." Emma held her breath. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak. She just stayed. A long, suspended moment passed between them. He didn't flinch, didn't growl. But more importantly, he didn't look away. Emma didn't know how long she sat like that. Still, quiet. A soft ache building in her lower back as the tiles chilled her legs through denim. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She ignored it. She wasn't thinking about her emails, or her to-do list, or the unpacked boxes in her new rental that still smelled faintly of someone else's life. She wasn't thinking about the divorce papers that had finalized 3 weeks ago, or the way she still reflexively reached for a toothbrush that wasn't hers anymore. She was just here, with him, the dog in the corner, Ghost. That's what they called him. But it felt less like a name and more like a confession, a presence fading at the edges, a life caught somewhere between this world and the one it used to know. Mike reappeared in the hallway, clipboard tucked under one arm. "You good?" he asked gently, stopping a few feet away so as not to startle the dog. Emma blinked as if surfacing from somewhere deep. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I just needed to sit." Mike glanced toward the kennel. Ghost had resumed his motionless posture, but his eyes, those haunted, burning eyes, remained fixed on her. Even in stillness, he was watching. "Not many people can sit like that," Mike murmured. "Most try to coax or call or get frustrated when he doesn't move." Emma gave a small shrug. "I've worked with people who don't respond to words. Sometimes presence matters more." Mike tilted his head. "You're a therapist, right?" "Physical therapist," she nodded. "Mostly post-op recovery, stroke rehab, but some PTSD work, too." Mike's expression softened into something almost reverent. "Maybe that's why he looked at you." Emma didn't reply, but in her chest something shifted. It wasn't logic. It wasn't training. It was a feeling, one she hadn't let herself lean into in months. The sense that just maybe this wasn't coincidence. Before she left, Emma rose slowly, careful not to make sudden moves. Her knees popped, her legs protested. Ghost didn't move, but he didn't retreat either. She stood for a moment, looking down at him. Then, without thinking, she whispered, "I'm sorry for whatever happened to you." His ear twitched. "Nothing more." She turned to go, and as she walked back down the corridor, her shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum, she felt his eyes follow her, not in fear, but in silence. And when she reached the doors and stepped into the light, she realized her hands were trembling slightly. Outside, she paused beneath the shade of the eaves, heart still beating faster than it should have. The desert sun was climbing, painting sharp shadows beneath the overhang. Something in her wanted to walk away, to file this under sad shelter story and return to the safety of routine. But another part of the part that made her sit cross-legged in a hallway without knowing why refused to leave it behind. Because in that half-second glance, in those hollow eyes, she hadn't seen defeat. She'd seen a question. Is someone coming? And maybe, just maybe, the answer was now walking away from him with a heart that wouldn't stop tugging back. Emma returned the next morning before she had even decided she would. She told herself she was just dropping something off, that she had forgotten a scarf or maybe had more blankets to donate, though there were none left. Truth was, she didn't sleep much the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, those amber ones filled the darkness. Quiet, watching. Haunted, yes, but not gone. Not yet. When she stepped back into the shelter lobby, the receptionist was different this time. Young, earbuds in, face buried in a clipboard. "I came yesterday," Emma said, unsure how to begin. "Just visiting. I sat with one of the dogs in the medical wing. Cage 14, I think." The girl blinked. "You mean Ghost?" Emma nodded. The receptionist frowned slightly. "He doesn't do well with visitors." "I know," Emma replied. "I wasn't trying to engage. I just sat." The girl eyed her curiously. "And?" Emma hesitated. He looked at me. That made the girl pause, not scoff, not dismiss, pause. Emma pressed gently. I'm not asking to go in, just to sit. Same place, same way, no contact, just be there. Hold on, the girl said, then disappeared down the hallway. Minutes later, Kelsey, the behaviorist, appeared. Her ponytail was damp from an early morning kennel scrub, her boots scuffed and streaked with bleach marks. She looked like someone used to having her hope tested. You're the therapist, right? She asked. Physical therapist, Emma clarified, mostly post-op, some trauma. Kelsey nodded slowly, studying her. He's non-responsive, she said plainly. Won't approach, won't eat in front of us. We've tried everything from desensitization to positive reinforcement. I'm not here to fix him, Emma said. I just don't want him to sit in that silence alone. Kelsey looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Okay, I'll walk you back. But no reaching through the bars, no eye contact unless he initiates it. And if he shows signs of stress, we stop immediately. Agreed, Emma said. They didn't speak as they walked through the corridors. The shelter buzzed with morning routines barking, metal doors clanking, hoses spraying concrete. But when they reached the far end, the air shifted, as if even the building understood this is where the hurting lives. Ghost hadn't moved from the corner, same place, same posture. But his eyes opened when Emma approached, and this time they didn't close again. Emma sat across from him like before, cross-legged, still, her presence soft as a hush. She'd brought a book this time, one she'd already read, dog-eared and familiar. She wasn't sure she'd actually read it aloud, but having it in her hands gave her something to hold besides silence. She opened it slowly, took a breath. Then, in the quietest tone she could manage, like one speaks to someone lying half asleep in the next room, she read. Nothing dramatic, just words. He had not seen the sea for many years, but he remembered it as if it were yesterday. The salt in the wind, the sound of the tide, and how every wave felt like a kind of forgiveness. No response. But his ears shifted. Not much. Just a flick. One angle to another. Kelsey, who had remained standing at the far end of the corridor, barely breathed. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Emma kept reading. Her voice wasn't theatrical or emotive. It was steady, plain, the kind of voice one might speak in when they aren't trying to impress, just exist. Minutes passed. Pages turned. Ghost didn't approach. But he didn't curl tighter, didn't look away. And his ears, those ears that hadn't twitched for any other sound, now angled toward her every time she spoke. "Subtle," Kelsey murmured, just loud enough for Emma to hear, but unmistakable. Emma closed the book gently after 30 minutes and simply sat there, looking down at her lap, allowing the quiet to stretch again. There was no agenda in her stillness, no expectation. She was not trying to fix him. She was letting him remember in his own time that not all silence means abandonment. When she rose to leave, Ghost didn't move. But this time, as she turned her back to him, a low, nearly inaudible breath escaped his note. It wasn't a whine, more like the sound someone makes after holding it in too long. At the front desk, as Emma signed out, Kelsey stood beside her. "You planning on coming back tomorrow?" she asked. Emma looked up. "Would that be okay?" Kelsey didn't answer right away. Then she said, "He heard you." For the first time, I think he actually heard someone. Emma nodded once, slowly. "Then yes," she said. I'll come back tomorrow." Kelsey gave the faintest smile, worn, uncertain, but real. As Emma stepped back into the Arizona sun, she didn't feel better. Not exactly, but she did feel anchored. And behind her, in Kennel 14, a dog who'd once been nothing but a shadow was beginning, at last, to turn toward the sound of his name, even if he hadn't remembered it yet. The third morning, Emma came prepared, not just with intention, but with quiet strategy. Healing she had learned over years of therapy work never happened by accident. Sometimes grace appeared uninvited, yes, but more often it needed space, stillness, and a rhythm gentle enough to coax the broken back toward breath. She parked farther from the shelter this time, slower steps, no rush, no nerves. Her arms were full of foldable camp chair with canvas arms, a small tote bag, a thermos of peppermint tea, and a Bluetooth speaker no bigger than her palm. Inside the shelter, the staff had already come to expect her. "You're back," the front desk girl said with a soft smile. Emma smiled too, not wide, just enough. Kelsey met her at the end of the hallway again. This time, her arms were crossed, not in doubt, but in study. "You brought gear." Emma nodded. "Just a few things, I promise. Nothing that breaks protocol." "What's the plan?" Emma exhaled slowly. "I'm going to recreate a version of my PTSD therapy setup. No direct interaction, just presence, controlled environment. Background audio, same rhythm, same tone, minimal input, maximum calm." Kelsey's eyes lingered on her. "You really think he's going to respond to classical music?" Emma gave the faintest smile. "I don't need him to respond. I just need him to exist inside a new sound." They entered the recovery corridor. The floor was already clean. The lights dimmed one level lower than usual. Kelsey's doing. Emma paused just outside Kennel 40. Ghost was there, exactly as before, folded into the farthest corner, not so much resting as bracing. Emma didn't speak. She unfolded the chair carefully, each movement deliberate and soft. She didn't want the clank of metal to undo what 2 days of stillness had begun. She placed the chair at the same spot where she had sat cross-legged before, but this time angled slightly to the side, so her body wouldn't face Ghost directly. Eye contact could still feel too much like a demand, too much like pressure. She set the speaker on the floor a few feet from her chair. Then, with a gentle press, the music began, not loud, barely above ambient. A soft adagio spilled into the hallway, a piano piece, simple, slow, the kind that lingered in the chest like memory, not meant to move the body, just the breath. Emma opened her novel again, the same one, dog-eared and worn. Her voice, when it came, was low, almost like a lullaby without melody. She wasn't reading to Ghost. She was simply reading near him. And though the house had long been silent, he found comfort in the creak of the old floorboards. It reminded him that something had stood there before, something had endured. Ghost didn't move, but he didn't shut down either. His eyes stayed open, fixed, not darting, watching. And then his ears moved, one then the other, subtle rotations toward the sound, not startled, not tense, just listening. Emma continued for an hour. Every so often she'd sip her tea or glance down at her notes, not the kind she took for work, but the kind she wrote when her hands needed to keep busy. Fragments of thought, unformed reflections, barely sentences. Once she whispered to herself without realizing, "He's still there." And somehow that was enough to make her stay longer. Kelsey passed through briefly near the end of the hour, checking on the other animals in the ward. When she reached Emma's chair, she stopped. "I've watched that dog for 23 days, she said under her breath. "And this is the first time he's held his posture that long without tensing." Emma didn't look up from her book. Stillness doesn't mean shut down. Sometimes it means safety. Kelsey nodded slowly. "He hears you." Emma turned a page. "Then I'll keep speaking." As the session neared its end, Emma didn't announce her departure. She simply closed the book, stood up, turned off the speaker, folded her chair. Ghost didn't move, but he didn't retreat either. His eyes followed the motion. She paused before leaving and whispered, barely audible, "I'll be back." This time, when her footsteps echoed down the corridor, a low sound followed. Not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, but something in between. A vibration in the chest of a creature who, for the first time in a long while, remembered what it felt like to miss someone. The fourth day came with the scent of rain in the distance. Not the kind that poured, but the kind that lingered suspended in the air, like a thought not yet spoken. The desert sky was a soft gray, rare for Arizona, and the temperature hung cooler, as if the world itself had taken a breath. Emma arrived just after 9 a.m., same as before. The front desk didn't ask her name anymore. They just nodded and buzzed her through. Kelsey was waiting halfway down the hall with a clipboard in hand. "No major movement overnight," she said, walking beside Emma. "He ate around 2 a.m., waited for the lights to cut. Standard pattern." Emma nodded, not disappointed. Progress wasn't a staircase. It was a shoreline, always retreating before it moved forward. When they reached Kennel 14, Emma slowed. Ghost was awake. Not just eyes open awake, but present. His head was slightly raised, his body not quite folded in. He didn't flinch when Emma approached, and for the first time, his eyes followed her before she sat down. That was new. That was something. She unfolded her camp chair, same angle as always, not directly facing him. She placed her small Bluetooth speaker on the floor and let the soft hum of a cello begin. No melody, just resonance. Then she opened her book. Not to read. Today she had a different plan. She closed the book after a minute and sat quietly, letting the music fill the stillness. Then she began speaking. Not to Ghost, just aloud. Her voice was calm, even, conversational. Morning was slow. I burned my toast again. I really should stop using that old toaster, but I keep telling myself it gives me personality. No response from the kennel. She smiled faintly and kept going. Almost forgot my keys. Had to go back inside twice. You'd think moving into a smaller place would help me get organized, but no, I still misplace everything. She sipped her tea. Let the moment breathe. The neighbor's cat stared me down again. He always acts like he owns the street. Maybe he does. Then she looked up. Not directly at Ghost, just toward the kennel. He had moved, a foot forward, one paw, then the other. No sound. No drama. just a slow, measured slide toward the center of the kennel. Emma didn't react, but her heartbeat quickened in her chest. She kept talking, her voice soft. "There's a cafe near my clinic. Small but cozy. I used to go there before work. Might start again." Behind her, Kelsey stepped quietly into the hallway. She saw the shift instantly. Her fingers reached for her phone, silent mode already on, and snapped a picture from a distance. Ghost no longer pressed into the corner. He wasn't at the gate, not even close, but he was centered, uncoiled, facing the open, facing her. Kelsey wrote it in her notes immediately. Day 4, moved to center of kennel. While Emma spoke, first voluntary approach to neutral space, no visible distress, eyes tracking, no lip licking, no trembling, full body posture alert but calm. Hope was not an explosion, it was a quiet breath. Emma continued her soft narration. "I started a new book last night. Couldn't sleep again. It's fiction this time, not one of the heavy ones. Something light." Her words weren't exciting, they weren't even important, but they were steady, predictable, gentle. And Ghost, for the first time, did not retreat. An hour passed like that. Not a performance, not a therapy session, just a woman talking to herself in the presence of a soul relearning safety. When Emma stood to leave, she did so slowly, careful not to break the thread. Ghost didn't flinch. He remained where he was, body angled toward the spot where she had sat. She looked once over her shoulder and saw it. A change so small most wouldn't have noticed it. His tail twitched, just a flick like a branch in still air. Back in the admin lounge, Kelsey placed a printout of the photo onto the whiteboard marked Behavioral Progress. The staff gathered around during lunch, quiet and wide-eyed. "He moved," one of them whispered. "He moved," Kelsey confirmed, "on his own." No one cheered, no one clapped, but the silence in the room softened, and that was enough. That evening, after dinner and dishes, Emma sat on her patio with a blanket across her lap and a journal in her hand. She hadn't written much lately, not since the divorce, not since her mother's passing. Too many endings, too few beginnings. But tonight, she opened to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote just 4 words. Today, he moved forward. And somehow, that felt like more than enough to keep going. It was the 7th morning, a full week since Emma first sat down in front of kennel without expectation, without demand, just presence. The air was crisp, rare for the Arizona sun, and Emma noticed the shift the moment she stepped from her car. The kind of morning where things felt more possible, though she wouldn't say it aloud. Not yet. Not when it was this fragile. She moved with practiced care through the shelter. By now, no one stopped her. No one asked questions. She belonged to the rhythm of this place now, as much as the staff, as much as the silent souls behind every kennel gate. And Ghost, especially Ghost. She reached the hallway and paused just outside the turn. The camp chair was already there. She'd started leaving it behind after day 4. Kelsey said it was fine. He notices the familiarity, she'd explained. He reacts when it's gone. Emma smiled faintly at that. How even absence could speak to a dog who refused to speak at all. When she stepped into view, she froze. Ghost wasn't in the corner. He was already at the center of the kennel, body upright, alert but not braced. His ears twitched when he heard her steps. His gaze met hers with something that wasn't panic, not resistance, not even wariness, just awareness. He knew she was coming. He'd been waiting. Emma sat quietly, same place, same angle, the cello music playing softly from the speaker. She didn't speak right away, just let the air fill with gentle sounding warmth. Ghost remained still, eyes following her, body low, but not collapsed. His ribs weren't as sharp anymore. His coat had begun slightly to reclaim its luster. And then, like the unfolding of something sacred, he took a step forward. Just one. Emma didn't breathe. Another, then another. 4 feet carried him across the worn rubber mat until the tip of his nose brushed against the front bar of the kennel. She hadn't seen him this close before. He was larger than she expected, taller, broader. But what struck her most wasn't his size. It was his silence. Not a fearful silence, a listening silence. She opened her book and read a single sentence aloud. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. Oh, yeah. Sometimes the people who disappear aren't really gone. They're just waiting for someone to notice they're still there. Ghost blinked. Then, without warning, without hesitation, he stepped forward again, his nose pressed gently through the gap in the bars, the faintest touch to her hand resting near the base. It wasn't a sniff. It wasn't an accident. It was a nudge, a question, a whisper. I see you. Emma's throat tightened. Her hand didn't move. She didn't dare ruin the moment with anything more than breath. Ghost kept his nose there, just for a second longer. Then he pulled back slowly, eyes still on her. And for the first time since he'd arrived at Red Ridge, the space between animal and human no longer felt like a void. It felt like a bridge, a fragile, trembling one, but real. Behind her, Kelsey had appeared again, standing at a respectful distance, silent. She hadn't seen the contact, but she had seen the posture shift, the approach. She could read a dog's body the way some people read music. "What happened?" she whispered. Emma's eyes remained locked on Ghost, but her voice came like a breath. "He touched me." Kelsey stepped closer, her voice low, reverent. "Physical contact?" Emma nodded. Kelsey didn't speak for a long moment. Then she smiled, not wide, but deep. "I'll make a note," she whispered, "but I think this one writes itself." Emma stayed for another 20 minutes, speaking softly, telling Ghost about her walk that morning, the birds in the yard, how she missed the snow in Colorado but didn't miss the cold. Ghost lay down at the front of the kennel, not touching the bars, but close, closer than he'd ever allowed himself to be. Before she left, Emma knelt slightly, level with his gaze. She didn't reach for him. She didn't need to. She just said it. Quiet, full, meant. "You're not gone," she whispered. "You're just waiting." Ghost didn't move, but his eyes stayed on her all the way down the corridor, all the way until she was out of sight. That night, Emma sat on the floor of her bedroom beside a box she hadn't opened in months. Inside were her mother's notes. Journals, old photographs, volunteer paperwork from Red Ridge, and taped inside one of the pages was a line written in her mother's looping script. "Not all ghosts haunt us. Some just need us to come back." Emma closed the box slowly, a tear sliding down her cheek, and somewhere in a kennel behind a chain-link gate, a dog who had once forgotten how to hope, had remembered. 3 days after Ghost's first touch, Emma received a call she hadn't been expecting. She was in her clinic's supply room, restocking resistance bands and reusable hot packs when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, local. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something tugged. "Emma Callahan," she answered, brushing her sleeve against the phone to muffle the faint sound of cello music playing in the background, still lingering from her shelter session earlier that morning. "Ms. Callahan, this is Alicia Baird from the VA out of Tempe," came the voice on the other end. Polite, brisk, and just slightly tired. "Dr. Wells gave me your name. Said you've got experience with neural rehab and post-combat clients?" "I do," Emma replied, "mostly outpatient. Some home-based care. We have a special case we're hoping you'd consider. TBI with lingering cognitive deficits, significant PTSD overlay. Male, early 30s, Army, multiple deployments. He refuses to come into the center. We've been trying to reach him for months." Emma switched the phone to her left hand, instinctively grabbing a clipboard with her right. "What's his current treatment plan?" "None. He's isolated. No compliance, no physical therapy since discharge. Wells thinks he may respond better to in-home work. Someone with a calm presence, someone he doesn't see as clinical." Emma's heart tightened, not with apprehension, but with a quiet kind of recognition. "What's his name?" she asked. "Hayes. Lieutenant Nolan Hayes." The address brought her to the outskirts of Mesa, just past where the newer houses ended and the desert began again. Nolan's place sat on a small lot, flat-roofed, pale stucco, with blinds drawn tight and a mailbox leaning like it had grown weary of its job. Emma parked across the street and sat in the car for a full minute before stepping out. She wasn't nervous, but there was a particular stillness to this sort of visit, the kind you learned not to disturb too quickly. A VA social worker met her at the door, early 50s, kind eyes, clipboard clutched like a shield. "He knows you're coming," the woman said, "but don't expect conversation. He's not hostile, just locked down." Emma gave a quiet nod. The door creaked open. Inside, the house was tidy but dim, sparse furniture, clean linens, everything in its place, but nothing with warmth, like a stage set someone had stopped believing in halfway through the script. Then she saw him. Lieutenant Nolan Hayes sat in a worn armchair by the window, the blinds cracked just enough to let in slivers of morning light. He was tall, probably over 6 feet when standing, but how he sat hunched slightly, broad shoulders tight, hands resting on his thighs. His hair was military short, his jaw shadowed with a few days' stubble. One leg trembled with unconscious, rhythmic motion. Emma stepped forward slowly. "Nolan?" she asked gently. His head turned just slightly, not toward her, just enough to acknowledge the sound. "I'm Emma Callahan, the physical therapist from the VA referral." He nodded once. That was it. She moved carefully, lowering her bag to the floor beside the sofa opposite him. "I'm not here to push anything. I just want to get a sense of where you're at physically. No pressure, no expectation." Still no words. But the tapping of his foot slowed. Emma began her standard intake questions, gently, spaced out with long pauses, ready to drop the moment he shut down. To her surprise, he didn't. He didn't offer full answers, but he nodded, shook his head, pointed when asked. When she asked if he was experiencing numbness in his limbs, he looked at her sharply for the first time. Not angry, just focused. "Left side," he muttered. His voice was hoarse, rough from disuse. She smiled gently. "Thank you." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Emma was just wrapping up her notes when he spoke again, this time unprompted. "You smell familiar." She looked up. "I'm sorry." He narrowed his eyes, still not facing her fully. "Not you. Your clothes, like sand and ash." Emma froze. Her pulse quickened quietly. "I've spent time in the desert," she offered. He shook his head. "Not this kind. This is war, burn pits, dust, dog hair." Emma's breath caught. Dog hair. She didn't respond, not yet, because something in his tone wasn't casual. It was remembering. When she finished her initial assessment, she stood slowly, offering him the space to disengage if he needed to, but he didn't. As she gathered her things, he said, "You're not like the others." Emma met his gaze for the first time directly. "I'm not trying to fix you," she said quietly. "Just meet you where you are." His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but not nothing. As she reached the door, she paused. "Would it be all right if I came back Thursday? We'll keep it light. Just a few mobility drills, no clinic stuff." A long pause. Then finally, he nodded once to, "Okay." Back in her car, Emma stared at the steering wheel for a long moment. Then she opened the center console and pulled out a crumpled sticky note where she'd scribbled a short list the night before. Ghost. Day 7. First contact. Trust healing. Trust it's the beginning. She looked at the final line. Somewhere this is already connected. Now, she wasn't so sure that was just metaphor anymore. Because when Nolan Hayes said ash and dog hair, he wasn't guessing. He was remembering. The third session at Nolan Hayes' house was quieter than the last. More silence, less nodding. His responses were delayed, eyes distant, as if his mind was walking through a different time zone and his body was struggling to catch up. Emma noticed the change as soon as she stepped inside. He looked the same chair by the window, same gray t-shirt and worn athletic pants. But something about his posture had shifted. The stiffness was tighter. The way his fingers curled over his knees was more protective than habitual. "Rough morning?" she asked gently. Nolan didn't answer, just gave a tight shrug and turned his eyes toward the sliver of sky outside. Emma didn't push. Instead, she adjusted the exercise plan, kept it simple. A few seated stretches, light resistance work. She spoke less this time, letting the space between her words stretch as wide as needed. It was only near the end, when she helped him roll his shoulder with a slow arm pass, that she noticed the scar, high up on his right deltoid, rough, jagged, older than the others. "Aid?" she asked, tone soft. He looked at her, not surprised, not offended. "Yeah," he said. "Syria, last tour." She didn't follow up, but the way he said it, last held weight. Finality. Not just chronologically, but emotionally. The war hadn't ended. It had just come home with him. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Something about Nolan's tension stayed with her, the haunted way his eyes flicked toward shadows that weren't there, the quiet flinching when a car door slammed too hard outside. She found herself reading old research notes she hadn't touched in months, studies on blast trauma, memory retrieval, canine Pete. Her thoughts kept circling the way Ghost had reacted to her clothes after her first session at Nolan's house. The way his nose pressed deeper into the fabric like he was trying to inhale something buried inside her. She had chalked it up to scent, to desert dust and old canvas, and the faint residue of her visit. But now it didn't feel like coincidence. The next morning, her phone buzzed at 6:41 a.m. VA contact, text message, short, clipped, urgent. Hayes had an episode last night, intense nightmare, shouting, name repeated, Ghost. Emma sat up in bed like the words had reached inside her lungs and pulled. Ghost? Not a ghost. Ghost. The name. By noon, she was back at Nolan's home. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot, skin pale beneath his tan. The front of his T-shirt was damp, as if from sweat that hadn't fully dried. He opened the door without a word and walked back to the chair by the window. Emma followed, unsure whether to acknowledge the report or wait for him to speak first. She didn't have to wait long. It's the same one, he said, not looking at her. She frowned slightly. The same what? The dream. Always the same. I'm back on patrol, sand in my boots, sun overhead. It's too quiet. Then the flash. Then nothing. He rubbed the back of his neck. The tension there looked permanent. I wake up, and my throat's raw from yelling, like last night. Emma hesitated. The report said you called out a name. He didn't move. Ghost, she said softly. That made him look at her. His eyes weren't just tired now. They were defensive, protective, as if she'd said something sacred without permission. You know that name? He asked. Emma kept her voice gentle. I've heard it somewhere. Silence stretched between them like a drawbridge rising. Finally, Nolan exhaled. Ghost wasn't a person, he said. He was my partner. Emma stilled. Partner? Nolan nodded. German Shepherd, military working dog, assigned to our unit for explosive detection. Best damn soldier I ever knew. Emma's breath caught, but she said nothing. Nolan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice lowered, not out of secrecy, but reverence. We were inseparable, trained together, slept side by side. He knew when something was wrong sometimes before I did. Saved our lives more times than I could count. He paused, jaw clenched. Last mission, roadside bomb. We were sweeping a convoy route. Ghost signaled, then started to pull back. But I stepped forward too fast. Everything exploded. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat, but didn't continue for a moment. They said he ran off after the blast, disoriented, vanished into the dust. I was medevaced out, never got to go back. He looked up at Emma. His face was stone, but his eyes shimmered. They told me later he was presumed KIA. I never saw him again. Emma's heart thudded in her chest. Presumed, not confirmed, not found. She searched Nolan's face for something else, some memory, some truth. What did he look like? She asked softly. Nolan's eyes didn't leave hers. Black and tear coat Amber eyes, scar on his right shoulder from a shrapnel wound, didn't slow him down a bit. Emma's hands were suddenly cold, scar on the shoulder. Amber eyes, the scent of sand and ash. Her next words came quietly, like stepping onto a frozen lake. "Nolan, what if he wasn't lost?" Emma didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. She sat on the edge of her bed long after midnight, Nolan's voice echoing in her mind. Amber eyes, scar on his right shoulder. Every detail had lined up like a haunting puzzle she didn't know she'd been assembling until now. Ghost hadn't just responded to her voice or her stillness. He had recognized something, not just scent, but familiarity. The smell of ash and scent, the trauma tucked into fibers of fabric worn in a house, still bearing the echoes of war. The uniform she hadn't changed out of, the same long-sleeved olive jacket she'd worn while sitting across from Nolan. Now it sat folded over her kitchen chair, heavy with implication. At 6:45 the next morning, Emma picked it up and slipped it back on. She didn't wash it, didn't Febreze it, didn't even lint roll the faint hairs clinging to the cuffs. She didn't want to erase anything, not today. Red Ridge was quiet when she arrived, too early for volunteers, just the overnight tech and a janitor with earbuds in. Emma walked straight through the back corridor toward the kennels, holding her breath in a way that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with hope. When she stepped into view of kennel, Ghost was already awake, sitting, alert, and watching. Emma moved slowly, kneeling just outside the bars like she had 100 times before. But this time she didn't bring a book, didn't play music, didn't speak. She just let him smell. The wind shifted through the open intake doors, and something unseen passed between them. Ghost rose, stiff at first, then smoother. And then he moved forward. No hesitation, no fear. He pressed his nose through the kennel bars directly toward her jacket. The sniffing was intense, focused. Not like his usual slow, curious tests. This was targeted. He hovered over the cuffs of her sleeves, nostrils flaring, then the collar, the chest, the hemline. Emma dared not move, not even blink. Then the sound came, soft, wounded, not a growl, not a bark, a whine, a deep, hollow, chest-borne whimper that vibrated more in the silence than any loud cry could have. Emma's breath hitched, because in that moment it wasn't just the whine of a dog. It was recognition, a call to something buried in memory, something older than shelter walls or rescue charts or behavioral reports. This was something Ghost had known once and lost. Kelsey entered just in time to see Ghost paw the front of the kennel gently, as if trying to find the source of something he couldn't believe was real. Emma turned her head, eyes wide. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Kelsey, has anyone ever checked if this dog has military origins?" Kelsey blinked, startled. Military? No, he didn't have tags, no microchip, no collar. Just that embedded piece they removed when he first came in. Emma stood slowly, jacket still damp with Ghost's breath. "Has anyone run his photo through the working dog registry?" Kelsey shook her head. "That's federal. We don't usually have access." "Then we need to find someone who does," Emma said, firmer now. She looked back at Ghost, who had sat down again, eyes locked on her like he was waiting for a door to be opened. "He's not just reacting to me," she whispered. He remembers, and I think he knows someone I know. Later that morning, Emma sat in the shelter's modest office, her laptop open to a page she'd never visited before. National Military Working Dog Registry, archived service logs. She couldn't access the secure files, but the open page let her submit a query. Dog's name? Unknown. Breed? German Shepherd. Estimated age? 6-8 years. Distinguishing marks: scar on right shoulder. Current location: Red Ridge Rescue Center, Arizona. In the comments, she wrote, possible match to dog missing in Assyria. Partner's name: Lieutenant Nolan Hayes. Animal shows signs of advanced training. PhD response: recognition behavior. Please advise if record exists. She hit submit and exhaled like she'd been underwater too long. That night, back home, she removed the jacket, carefully folding it like something sacred. She set it near the window, then lit the small candle her mother had kept on her porch for the ones who are lost. Only this time, Emma didn't feel like she was lighting it for someone lost. She was lighting it for someone on his way back. The sun was just beginning to melt over the Arizona horizon when Emma pulled into Nolan's driveway. She hadn't planned to come back so soon, not less than 24 hours after his nightmare, after the name Ghost shattered whatever thin barrier still separated his past from his present. But she hadn't been able to stop thinking, not about the scar, not about the match her gut had already made long before she'd accepted it out loud. Nolan opened the door before she could knock. He looked tired but less guarded, like speaking Ghost's name had unlocked something long dormant inside of him. Pain, yes, but also possibility. I need to ask you something, Emma said, stepping just inside. Nolan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She didn't waste time. You said Ghost had a scar. Where? Nolan's brow furrowed. Right shoulder, high up, close to the collarbone. He took shrapnel during a recon sweep. We patched it in the field. Emma's breath caught. Do you remember the shape? Yeah, he said slowly. Rough crescent, ragged edges, not clean like a surgery scar. It didn't fade all the way. She nodded, then turned toward the door again. I think I know where he is. Nolan blinked. What? Emma looked over her shoulder. I think he's been trying to come back to you this whole time, and I think you're the only one who ever knew how to read him. Back at Red Ridge, the halls were quiet. Most of the morning intake was finished, and only the soft rustling of kennel blankets and the occasional low bark filled the air. Kelsey raised an eyebrow when Emma walked in with purpose. Back so soon? She asked. Emma nodded, already heading toward the back. I need to examine Ghost. I need to check something. Emma, I won't touch him unless he lets me. But this is important. Kelsey followed, her expression serious now. You're shaking. Emma glanced down at her hands. She hadn't even noticed the tremor. When she reached Kennel 14, Ghost was resting, not sleeping, just still, like always, like he was saving energy for something he wasn't sure would come. He stood the moment he saw her, not urgently, just present. Emma crouched slowly, keeping her posture neutral, calm. Hi, boy, she whispered. Ghost moved forward closer than usual. She could see his chest rise and fall, the slight twitch of his ears, the way his eyes scanned her face like he remembered something she didn't. I need to check your shoulder, she said softly, more for herself than to him. I need to know. She reached toward the latch with gloved hands. Ghost didn't retreat. Kelsey stiffened behind her. "Are you sure?" "No," Emma whispered, "but I have to try." She opened the kennel slowly. Ghost didn't move. She stepped inside with caution, her body low, her breath steady. And Ghost, still silent, took a single step forward, then sat right in front of her. Emma reached out, hand trembling. "Good boy, I'm just going to look." "That's all." Her fingers moved gently toward his right shoulder, brushing back the coarse fur near the joint. And there it was, a scar. Not surgical, not symmetrical, a jagged, rough-edged crescent that caught the light in a pale shimmer against the darker coat. Emma's breath hitched in her throat. Her hand hovered just above the mark, afraid to touch it, as if contact might dissolve the truth staring her in the face. "This is it," she whispered. Kelsey stepped closer. "What is?" Emma's voice cracked. "Nolan described this scar, exact placement, exact shape. Ghost earned it in Syria during a blast. They were partners. They lost each other in the dust." Kelsey's expression softened, eyes wide, with something between disbelief and awe. Emma's fingers gently brushed the edge of the scar, careful not to linger too long. Ghost didn't flinch, didn't move. He just stood there, breathing softly, eyes fixed on hers, with something that felt like patience. Like he'd been waiting for someone to see. Emma swallowed hard, heart pounding. "I think he's more than a rescue," she said, voice low. "I think he's a soldier." She knelt down fully, eye to eye now. "You never got to go home, did you?" Ghost didn't respond, but he didn't have to. The scar said everything. That afternoon, Emma sat with her laptop again, this time in the staff break room. She opened the National Military Working Dog Registry once more, but instead of submitting another anonymous query, she attached photos close-ups of the scar, Ghost's profile, and a short note. Possible embedded, believed to be Ghost, MIA from Syria mission in 20th partner, Lieutenant Nolan Hayes, scar confirmed, behavioral links confirmed, seeking official confirmation. She hit send, then she closed her eyes. And for the first time since this began, she let herself believe it, not just hope, believe. That somewhere between memory and miracle, something had survived. Nolan stood just outside the side entrance of Red Ridge Rescue Center, his hands clenched into tight fists inside his jacket pockets. His shoulders were square, but Emma could see the tension vibrating beneath the surface, like a man waiting for a verdict he never asked for. "You don't have to do this today," Emma said softly. "We can wait?" "No." Nolan cut in, not unkindly. "I've waited long enough, but I don't want to fall apart if it's not him." Emma nodded. "Then just stay still. No expectations, just observation." He didn't move for a moment. Then, "If it is him, he'll let me know." They'd arranged everything before sunrise, closed the hallway, cleared the staff, and gave Ghost the entire exam room for this moment. He was already inside, pacing gently, eyes alert but not alarmed. Emma walked Nolan in through the opposite side. He stood at the edge of the room, keeping his distance. Ghost stopped pacing and turned to face the man who had just entered. There were 6 feet between them, a gulf of years, dust, shrapnel, memory. Emma whispered, "He doesn't respond to anyone else, but if you think there's a chance." Nolan exhaled through his nose, then took a single step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move his arms. He just said the word the way a soldier would, sharp, exact from the gut. "Attention!" Ghost jolted. It was immediate. Like a switch had flipped, his ears snapped forward. His back straightened. His entire body locked into a rigid stance, and fixed on Nolan. Nolan didn't move, didn't smile, didn't breathe. Emma covered her mouth with one hand. Ghost stood frozen in that soldier's stance for nearly 3 full seconds. Then Nolan tried again. This time, his voice cracked, but the words came out with the kind of force only buried love can carry. "Ghost, come!" The explosion wasn't in a war zone this time. It was in motion. Ghost launched across the room. No hesitation, no confusion, no fear, just pure, unfiltered recognition. He crossed the space in 3 strides, all muscle and momentum, and collided into Nolan's chest, with a sound that wasn't a bark or a growl, but a whine so desperate, so visceral, it felt like it had been caught in his throat for years. Nolan dropped to his knees instantly, his arms wrapped around the dog like a man gripping the edge of a cliff. "Jesus," he whispered, voice cracking open. "It's really you?" Ghost buried his head against Nolan's neck, pawing, nuzzling, pushing closer, as if he were trying to climb into the man's ribs, trying to get back into the heart that had once been his home. Emma stood at the edge of the room, unable to move, tears hot in her eyes. This wasn't just reunion. This was resurrection. Ghost licked Nolan's cheek with frantic devotion, then pressed his body against the man's chest and refused to move. Nolan didn't care that he was on the floor, didn't care that he was sobbing, now face buried in the fur of a soldier lost and found. "You were gone," he whispered. "I thought you were gone." Ghost didn't make a sound. He just stayed pressed to him, tail finally wagging in slow, steady beats like a heartbeat starting again. Emma knelt slowly, giving them distance but needing to be close. "It's him," she whispered, not to confirm, just to say it out loud. He remembered. When Kelsey peeked in from the back hall, her clipboard fell from her hand. She covered her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'll update the system," she whispered. "He's no longer adoptable. He's going home." 15 minutes passed before anyone moved. Nolan sat with Ghost's head in his lap, fingers stroking behind his ears in rhythm. "He used to do this thing," Nolan murmured, eyes distant, "after long missions. He'd crawl into my bunk and curl up by my feet. No commands, no coaxing, just instinct, like he knew I couldn't sleep without him." Emma smiled, crouched a few feet away. "I think he still knows." As they left the room, Ghost stayed glued to Nolan's pitted step for a step, tail low but calm, a ghost no longer, just a soldier returning home. And the man who had never stopped waiting for him. The room was still, so still it felt like time itself had stepped back to watch. No barks, no footsteps, no intake calls echoing down the corridor, just the sound of breath. Ghosts, quick and rhythmic, like he was trying to make up for the years lost. Nolan's, heavy and ragged, breaking open after being held hostage for too long. The German shepherd was no longer pacing behind kennel bars. He was in Nolan's lap fully, fervently, without reserve. His body pressed hard against the man's chest, as if he feared, even now, that this moment could disappear again. His paws clutched at Nolan's shoulders, his nose buried deep under the man's jawline. He licked the salt from Nolan's face over and over like he was erasing the years of absence one stroke at a time. Nolan didn't push him away. He collapsed into him. His hands trembled as they curled around Ghost's frame, one at the neck, the other around his rib cage, holding tight, then tighter, like he was afraid Ghost might vanish into smoke if he let go for even a second. And then he cried. Not quietly, not politely, but fully, unfiltered. A raw, broken sob that tore from somewhere deep inside, the kind of cry men like Nolan weren't allowed to release on base, or in therapy, or even in the dark. Ghost didn't flinch. He leaned into it, whimpering low in his throat, not with panic, but empathy. The sound of a soldier answering a call he understood. Emma stood at the doorway, hand pressed against her chest. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't dare interrupt. Behind her, the shelter staff had gathered silently. Kelsey, the vet, one of the overnight techs who had once helped clean Ghost's infected neck wound, a young intern holding a clipboard to her chest like it was armor against the emotion flooding the room. No one said a word because there was nothing to say. This wasn't just a reunion, this was a reckoning. Ghost shifted in Nolan's lap, pressing his forehead against the man's sternum like he was trying to crawl inside his heartbeat. Nolan cupped the dog's jaw in both hands, gently lifting his face. His voice was hoarse, wet with disbelief. "I thought you were dead," he choked out. Ghost blinked slowly. Amber eyes locked on Nolan's, as if to say, "So did I." Nolan laughed through the tears, the sound cracking in the center. "You came back to me," he whispered. Ghost licked the trail of tears down the man's cheek, then rested his chin on Nolan's shoulder with a deep exhaled breath, as if he, too, had been holding it in for years. A murmur stirred behind them. Someone sniffled. Someone else reached for tissues and passed them down like communion. Kelsey wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "We get hundreds of dogs a year," she whispered to the vet beside her. "But I've never seen this. Never." Emma stepped closer, crouching beside them now, just far enough to give space but close enough to witness. She met Nolan's eyes gently. "I think he remembered you before you remembered yourself," she said. Nolan nodded, unable to speak. Ghost's tail thumped once, twice against the floor. Slow, measured, like a heartbeat, rediscovering its rhythm. Minutes passed. Someone turned off the overhead light. The room dimmed into a golden hue, soft and reverent. It felt more like a cathedral than a kennel. Nolan eventually sat back against the wall, Ghost still half draped over him. His hand stroked behind the dog's ears, slow and steady, a rhythm they both remembered. "I used to wonder," Nolan said quietly, "in the hospital, if I imagined him, if maybe I just needed to believe someone had made it out with me." Emma blinked through the sting in her eyes. "You didn't imagine him." He looked at her. "You just didn't know he was still fighting his way back." The shelter director approached quietly with a clipboard. No formality, no speech, just a signature line at the bottom of a file labeled, "Reclaim request, military working dog. Status confirmed." Nolan didn't ask for legal clarification. He just signed his name. As they left the room slowly, Ghost pressed so close to Nolan's leg it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Emma paused near the door. She turned back one last time, eyes scanning the empty kennel. There were scratches on the walls where Ghost had once spun in circles, a blanket that had never quite been used, and an empty water bowl now glinting in the dim light like something sacred had passed through. She whispered more to the space than anyone else. "He's not a ghost anymore," then turned to follow the man and the dog who had just found their way back to each other through shrapnel, silence, and time. The truck rumbled up the gravel drive beneath a soft Arizona twilight. In the back seat, Ghost sat still, his gaze fixed ahead, not afraid, just alert. Nolan stepped out and opened the rear door. "Come on, buddy." Ghost didn't move at first. He scanned the open space, wary like a soldier entering an unsecured zone. Emma stood on the porch, a canvas bag in hand filled with bowls, a worn blanket, and a printed schedule she'd made for Ghost and Nolan. Everything intentional, nothing random. Eventually, Ghost stepped down, tail low, not scared, just cautious. He sniffed the air. Sagebrush, dry wood, and something faint but familiar in the porch planks. Home. Inside, the house was modest, military, tiddy with soft traces of comfort. Ghost hesitated at the door, ears back. Nolan and Emma said nothing, just waited. Ghost circled slowly, noses down, checking each room, mapping exits. In front of the fireplace, he paused, then at the couch, then back to the entryway, assessing. Emma knelt by the couch, unfolding the same blanket from the shelter. "This is yours if you want it," she said quietly. Ghost didn't move closer, but he didn't leave either. That was enough. Later, they had dinner. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. Ghost rested in the corner, positioned where he could see every door, watching but not tense. Afterward, Nolan set up a bed for Ghost in the spare room. Emma handed him a lavender diffuser. "For hyper-arousal, let's try it tonight." Nolan hesitated. What if he never relaxes? Emma met his eyes. "Then we just keep showing up." Before leaving, she glanced at Ghost now, stationed between Nolan's room and the front door, still guarding. "He's already doing his job," she said. Nolan nodded. "But this time, he doesn't have to die doing it." That night, the silence inside the house shifted. Not emptiness, but peace. The kind that begins with return. In the mornings, Ghost lay at the bedroom threshold, always present, always waiting. 9 days in, Nolan went back to therapy. But he didn't go alone. At the VA clinic, the ghost still lingered. But this time, a different ghost walked beside him. No vest, no badge, just instinct and memory. In session, Nolan fidgeted, fists clenched. Ghost slowly moved closer, his paw resting against Nolan's boot, grounding him. "He does that when your breath changes," Emma later explained. "You think it's deliberate?" She nodded. "That's what he was trained to do." "He's doing his old job again," Nolan muttered. "Not for the Army," she said. "But yeah, he's working again." At home, the routine took shape. Morning stretches, deep breathing. Ghost mirrored Nolan lying down, inching closer, pressing his chin to Nolan's chest. An anchor! Twice, Nolan spiraled into panic. Ghost found him each time. No barking, no drama, just presence, a pause, a nudge. Enough to bring him back. One afternoon, Nolan sat on the kitchen floor beside Ghost. "You shouldn't have made it out," he whispered. But you did. You never stopped. Ghost pressed against him, head in Nolan's neck. No sound, just trust. Emma visited often, not just for Ghost, but for Nolan, tea, silence, shared ground. He responds to your hope, she told him once. He didn't know how to answer. But that night, when he woke sweating from a shallow dream, Ghost was already there, wrapped around his leg, eyes open. No command, just the truth. He was still doing his job. By the end of the second week, Nolan joined a trauma group. 5 vets, 1 dog, Ghost, listened. Then crossed the room when one man trembled, lying beside him. The man stopped shaking. No words were needed. They made space for Ghost after that. One evening, Emma came for dinner. Nolan cooked. Small victories, he called them. As they ate, he talked about group therapy, breath work, early walks. "You're both rebuilding," she said. "We're not the same," he answered, glancing at Ghost. "But maybe that's okay." One morning, Nolan stood at the door. Ghost beside him, not pulling, just waiting. For days, Nolan had imagined this moment. All the versions ended differently, but not this one. He turned the knob. The world didn't rush in. It waited. Ghost rose. One look at Nolan, one step. Together they crossed the threshold. The gravel path crunched beneath them. No flashbacks, no explosions, just breath, just presence. They stopped at the split in the trail, watching the sun rise over the ridge, orange, pink, purple. Nolan scratched behind Ghost's ears. "We've walked through worse." Ghost stood. They turned back. Not because they had to, but because those steps were enough. Back on the porch, Nolan poured coffee. Ghost lay near the door, not guarding, just resting. When Emma arrived, she paused. Something had changed. "You went outside," she said. Nolan nodded. "Just down the path," then smiled. But it felt like crossing the whole damn world. Ghost lifted his head, and Nolan finally whispered what he once thought he'd never say. "We made it." The living room was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the soft rhythm of Ghost's breathing. Outside, cicadas hummed under the desert dusk. Inside, silence filled the space-dense, unsaid familiar. Emma curled into the couch's far corner, a blanket across her knees. Her hair was slightly windblown. She hadn't spoken in over a minute. Nolan sat across from her in the old armchair, mug in hand, elbows on knees. He didn't push. He just waited like someone who'd learned that some silences need to be honored, not broken. Ghost lay between them, head on his paws, not asleep, just present. "I wasn't supposed to stay this long," Emma finally said. "In Arizona, I mean." Nolan tilted his head. "You have someone waiting in Colorado?" She shook her head. "No, that's the thing. There's no one waiting anywhere." Her voice frayed slightly. "I moved here to clean out my mom's house. She passed last spring. Stroke. No time to apologize for the years I didn't visit." Nolan stayed silent. "I just finalized the divorce. I thought maybe a new zip code would mean I didn't have to feel like I'd failed." Ghost's tail brushed her boot like a whisper. "Still here. I found her blankets in the linen closet. Couldn't throw them out. So I brought them to the shelter." She looked at Ghost. "And then I saw him, curled up, empty-eyed, just like me." Nolan said softly, "You weren't empty." Emma looked up. "I was. You don't feel it at first, but then silence echoes. Every room's too big. Every kindness feels like a trick. Another pause. Gentler now. I'm good at helping others, but trust? She shook her head. Harder when you expect the people you love to fade, Nolan nodded. I didn't talk to anyone for 2 years after the blast. I spoke, but it wasn't me. Just the version they needed for paperwork. Emma met his eyes. Is that why you stopped therapy? He nodded. Until you. Ghost sighed in the middle, ear flicking. Emma smiled. He always lays like that between us, like a bridge. Maybe he is, Nolan said. Between who we were and who we're trying to be. Emma stared at Ghost. Is that why he waited? Not just for you, but for me? Nolan didn't answer, just reached forward, resting a hand on Ghost's back. The dog didn't move, but his tail gave a slow, steady thump. Later, they sat outside. No declarations, just the hum of insects. Two people close enough for grief to touch, and neither pulled away. The letter came in a plain envelope. Government issue beige, the kind no one wants. Emma almost tossed it. Then she read the return address. Department of Veterans Affairs. She hadn't applied for anything. Inside was a single page. We are pleased to extend a request for your consultation in the development of new canine-assisted rehabilitation protocols. She read it again and again. It wasn't a mistake. They were asking her to help build something from what she'd done instinctively in quiet rooms with one broken dog. She drove to Nolan's without texting first. She needed grounding. He was on the porch with a book. Ghost lay by his feet, loyal as ever. You okay? He asked. I got a letter, she said. He set the book down. From who? The VA. She handed it to him. He read it. His jaw moved, but he didn't look surprised. You knew, she said. I didn't want to tell you until they followed through. You recommended me? He nodded. I told them what you'd done, what I'd seen. No credentials, no protocol, just you. Emma sat beside him, stunned. I'm not a psychologist. No, Nolan said. You're someone who sees what's broken and stays. Ghost rested his chin on her shoe. She ran her fingers through his fur. I don't know if I'm qualified. You are. You've been doing this all along. The only difference is they're watching now. Her throat tightened. The letter felt heavier in her lap. I thought I was just helping one dog. You were, Nolan said, but that dog had a long memory and a wide circle. She asked quietly, what would it even look like, teaching this? It didn't come from nowhere, he replied. It came from grief and love. Emma hadn't expected to build anything after Colorado. She hadn't thought she could, but now the path ahead felt real, uncertain, but real. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was starting over. She felt like she was continuing something. As the sun dipped low, Ghost rose and nudged Emma's arm, like he did on the days when Nolan couldn't speak. She looked down at him, then at Nolan. I'm going to say yes. The thunder came without warning, sky splitting, windows rattling. Ghost had been dozing, but when the boom hit, his body jolted, muscles tight. Nolan leaned forward. "Hey, it's just a storm." But Ghost didn't hear that, or if he did, it was too late. His eyes lost recognition, and he moved, not sprinting, but low, controlled, like in combat. He slipped down the hallway. Nolan followed. He found Ghost wedged between the washer and wall, trembling. "Ghost!" Another crack of thunder. Ghost whimpered. Nolan crouched, careful and quiet. "It's okay," he said. "It's just thunder." Ghost didn't look up. Nolan inched closer. "You don't have to protect me tonight," he said softly. "Let me protect you." He sat shoulder to shoulder beside him. The tremors in Ghost's body pulsed against his side. "It's not bombs, not gunfire. You're home." Pause. "I know your body doesn't believe it. Mine doesn't either. Sometimes." Another rumble. Ghost flinched but didn't move. Then slowly he leaned, just enough for his side to press into Nolan's. And finally he laid his head in Nolan's lap. They stayed that way. Storm outside, stillness inside. Nolan stroked his fur steady, not the rescued, but the rescuer, not forgetting the pain, but offering safety where the scars still lived. And by the time the storm moved on, the hallway held no more shaking, just one man, one dog, and a vow. Nobody hides alone anymore. The sound of hammers echoed across Nolan's property like a steady heartbeat measured, alive. The front yard, once bare and forgotten, now buzzed with motion. Toolboxes lay open, sawdust lingered in the breeze, and 2 trucks idled at the curb. On the porch, Ghost sat tall, watching quietly, ears forward, tail still, like he understood that something was being built. Not just a fence, but a new chapter. Nolan stood beside him, arms folded, still struggling to take it all in. He hadn't asked for this, but help had come anyway. It started with George, a retired contractor from 3 houses down. He'd read the newspaper article, seen the photo of Ghost curled against Nolan's leg, and then he'd shown up, no fanfare asking, "That fence still giving you trouble?" Nolan barely answered. George didn't need one. 2 days later, he returned with lumber, a crew, and a box of nails older than some of the volunteers. By afternoon, they were building more than a fence. They were restoring something Nolan hadn't realized he'd lost, his place in a world that had kept going without him. Emma showed up with lemonade and a bowl of fruit, her shirt flecked with sawdust, hair tied back. She looked like she belonged. "Is this real?" Nolan asked as she stepped onto the porch. Emma smiled. "More real than most things." Ghost stood to nudge her hip with his nose. She scratched his ears. "He's becoming a celebrity, you know." "He doesn't even know," Nolan replied. "That's the best kind," she said. "The ones who just exist and still manage to heal the room." She nodded toward the flower beds. "Church ladies are dropping off sunflowers later." "For what?" "They said every hero deserves a garden." Nolan had no answer for that. By late afternoon, the fence stood strong, warm-toned, respectful. Not a wall, a boundary of peace. Kids from the block brought painted rocks with Ghost's name. A single mother dropped off toys, treats, and a drawing from her daughter. Just a stick figure soldier and a dog under a rainbow. Nolan stared at it for a long time. That night, under gold-purple skies, Nolan stood by the new gate. Ghost trotted beside him. no longer flinching, no longer unsure. Neighbors waved. Some stopped to say thank you, not for anything specific, just for the story. For the reminder that survival isn't just breathing, it's choosing to live. Nolan crouched and whispered into Ghost's fur. "They're not here for me." Ghost didn't move. "They saw you, what you didn't give up on." A pause. "You stayed." Ghost turned. Those amber eyes didn't carry speeches, just presence. And that, Nolan knew now, was enough. The fence was done by sunset. Sunflowers, already sprouting, lined its base, planted by hands Nolan never saw. But he didn't need to, because now he understood. Healing wasn't solitary. It was a ripple. And Ghost, he was the stone. At Red Ridge Rescue, the gate creaked open just past 10 a.m. Sunlight spilled across the gravel. Ghost stepped through it on his own this time. Head high, calm, Emma and Nolan followed. Nolan's hand hovered near Ghost's back. An old habit, not fear, just familiarity. Inside, the barking rose like a wave, but one cry cut through a high-pitched whine, small, broken. "New intake," Kayla explained. 5 months old, abandoned, won't eat, won't come out from under the cot. Ghost paused. Emma crouched beside him. "Want to show him it's okay?" No command, just trust. Ghost moved forward, slow, deliberate, to cage 14, his old cage. Inside, a trembling pup, ash gray, eyes too big for its face. It didn't bark, just shook. Ghost didn't approach. He sat 3 feet away, still, waiting. The pup peeked out, no words, just breath. And then, inch by inch, the little body crawled forward, nose to bars. Ghost didn't move, just swept his tail once. The pup froze, then leaned closer, nose to nose, no sound, no drama, just a message passed silently. "You're not alone." Kayla wiped her eyes. Emma placed a hand on her chest. "He's teaching others what he had to learn the hard way." Nolan didn't speak, just watched the dog he once thought lost, now guiding another back from the brink. Ghost moved through the shelter without urgency, laying near doors, waiting, settling rooms with presence alone. The barking eased, the pacing stopped. Even the staff gathered watching, quiet. By the time Ghost reached the lobby, the building felt softer. Kayla whispered to Emma, "I used to think some dogs were just too broken." Emma looked at Ghost beside Nolan. "Sometimes," she said, "they just need someone who knows." They left without fanfare, no applause. Just a dog, a man, and a woman walking back through the same gate, but no longer the same people. Ghost paused before stepping into the car, glancing back once. Nolan watched him and said, "He went back to the place that almost killed him." Emma nodded and helped it breathe again. On Tuesday morning, the knock was gentle. Emma opened the door to a woman in jeans, a windbreaker, and a press badge. Sienna Rowe, reporter from the Copper Ridge Chronicle. "I read the shelter's update. I'd love to tell his story." Ghost peeked from behind Emma. Nolan stepped into the doorway. A pause, a nod. They sat on the porch, no stage, just a bench, and Ghost curled between them. Sienna's questions began simply: dates, missions, then deeper. "What made you keep visiting the shelter?" she asked Emma. Emma smiled. He didn't bark or beg. He just was. But his silence carried weight, a story that hadn't been told. Sienna turned to Nolan. "And you never knew he survived?" "No," Nolan said quietly. "They told me he was gone." He looked down at Ghost's paw on his boot. "I carried that grief for years. Then one day, he walks back into my life." "And the past starts knocking again?" Sienna asked. "What was it like?" Realizing it was him, Nolan paused. "It broke me. And then it rebuilt something." He touched Ghost's fur. "I think we saved each other." By week's end, the article dropped. "The Ghost Who Stayed, How a Lost War Dog Found His Way Home." The photo, Nolan and Emma on the porch, Ghost between them, proud, centered. It spread fast 8,000 shares, then 30,000. A DC K9 unit reposted, "Heroes wear fur too." Messages poured in, veterans, therapists, strangers. One said, "I haven't cried like this since Fallujah." Another, "This story feels like a second chance." Ghost was no longer page 14. Not a file, not a statistic. He was a symbol of survival, of healing, of what happens when someone chooses to see the broken not as burden, but as possibility. That night, Nolan sat on the porch, Ghost beside him, stars clear above. "You were never just a number," Nolan whispered, "but now the world knows it too." Ghost nudged his hand soft, certain, and Nolan smiled, because maybe, just maybe, he understood. The late afternoon sun soaked the porch in soft amber. Cicadas sang somewhere far off, and the breeze smelled faintly of pine and something warm drifting from a neighbor's kitchen, maybe cornbread. Emma leaned on the railing, a glass of iced tea cradled in both hands. She wore a denim jacket over Scrub's hair, loosely tied back. It looked like she hadn't planned to stay, but hadn't wanted to leave either. Nolan stood nearby, pretending to fiddle with Ghost's leash, though the dog had been resting quietly at Emma's feet for nearly half an hour. He cleared his throat once, then again. Emma glanced over. "You okay?" He nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." A beat passed. Then, a little too fast, he asked, "Would you maybe want to stay for dinner?" Emma blinked. The words hung there unguarded, sincere. Nolan added, "Not as a therapist, just as you, Emma." She looked down at her tea, then at Ghost, who tilted his head slightly toward Nolan, as if catching something unspoken. Emma let out a soft, surprised laugh. "Didn't peg you for a spontaneous kind of guy." "I'm not," Nolan said, "but it feels like the right time to try." There was a pause. She looked at him, really looked, at the man who once avoided eye contact, the soldier who no longer wore grief like armor, the dog who brought them out of silence. "Yes," she whispered, then smiled. "But only if I get to pick the playlist." Nolan exhaled. "Deal!" Later, in the kitchen, Nolan fumbled with a pan and an old recipe card. Emma chopped onions, sleeves rolled up. It felt oddly natural. Ghost curled in the doorway, not intruding, just there. "I think he likes when we're in the same room," Emma said. "I think I do too," Nolan replied. Outside, the sky faded to purple and orange. Inside, something shifted. Quiet, fragile. Not a confession, not a beginning, but a door opening. The last song on Emma's playlist played soft piano. Dishes were half washed, forgotten. Ghost lay sprawled on the rug, tail twitching in a dream. The house was still, but not empty. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through Nolan's old records, most dusty, left from his parents. "Fleetwood Mac?" she asked. "Too many ghosts," Nolan murmured. She smiled gently, pulling out Ella Fitzgerald. "Too much?" "Not enough," he replied, stepping closer. "I don't know how to say this," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, I'll just ask." He extended his hand, awkward but steady. "Dance with me?" Emma stood and took it. The saxophone began. Ella's voice floated like velvet. They moved clumsily. Nolan's steps stiff, Emma's arm bumping his. They both laughed, too loud. Ghost lifted his head, watching, then rose and circled them once, then again and again, a perfect, slow rhythm his own. "He's making sure we don't get ahead of ourselves," Emma whispered. The room felt warm, not from heat, but nearness. Emma rested her head on Nolan's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He just let her. When he exhaled, it was as if he'd been holding that breath since the desert. "You know," Nolan murmured, "this doesn't feel like something broken trying to be fixed." Emma looked up. "It feels like something new, learning how to begin." Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the music played on. And between what had been and what might still be, they danced, not to forget, but to remember that healing too can move. Ghost pressed his head against Nolan's shin. Nolan smiled. The dream came softly. No blood, no sirens, no dust. Just a golden field like memory invents when reality's too harsh. In it, Nolan was younger. Ghost trotted ahead through tall grass, tail wagging like a metronome. No urgency, just presence. Then Emma was there, not walking toward him, just there, hand brushing his. She didn't need to speak. The air was soft, and Nolan without armor, without weight, just was. He woke to warmth. Ghost lay curled at his feet, breath slow and deep. A gentle thump came with each exhale, his tail twitching in a dream. Beside Nolan, Emma. Her shoulder touched his lightly. One arm tucked beneath her, the other resting across her stomach. Hair spilled over his forearm. She didn't stir. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was awake or still in the dream. But this was real. The muted light creeping through the blinds said dawn was near, a sacred hour. He didn't move. Let it fill him gently. No panic, no ache, just peace, wholeness. Not the kind you beg for in therapy, the quiet kind. He thought of all those nights upright in bed, fists clenched, waking to ghosts, and now no mission, no trauma, just this, a dog, a woman, a silence that no longer haunted, but healed. Emma stirred, hand brushing his wrist, her eyes opened, still soft with sleep. "Morning," she murmured. "I had a dream," he said. "Nightmare?" He shook his head. "No, a memory, but not one I'd ever lived. Until now." She didn't ask for more, just slid her fingers through his. "Maybe it was a preview," she whispered. Ghost yawned, then rolled onto his side with a grunt. Emma chuckled. Way to ruin the moment. But Nolan smiled, a real one. He looked around the room. The shadows held no threat. The silence was gentle. And for the first time in years, Nolan Hayes didn't just believe he'd survived. He knew, bone deep, that he had arrived. He was home. The sun rose crisp over the Arizona horizon, casting long amber streaks across the freshly mowed lawn of the Veterans Affairs rehabilitation campus. Rows of folding chairs had been arranged on the grass, their white plastic backs already warming in the morning light. A podium stood at the front with a navy blue banner fluttering behind it. Launching Hope, National Canine Therapy Initiative. It was the kind of morning that smelled of new beginnings. Nolan Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart pacing faster than his feet. He wore a clean button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a subtle tremor running through his fingertips, not from weakness, but from something deeper. Anticipation, awe. At his side, Ghost sat tall and calm, wearing a new collar with a brass tag. Service Companion Canine Unit, Retil. There was a ribbon tied loosely around it, navy blue, the same color as the banner swaying nearby. People were gathering. Local news vans were parking on the curb. Some of the therapy staff waved to Nolan, but his eyes were on the walkway in front of him, 40 paces of open grass leading to the podium. No crutches, no cane, just him and Ghost. Emma stood a few feet behind, arms crossed, her eyelids already glassing her eyes. A VA coordinator stepped up to the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today as we celebrate the launch of the Canine Therapy Program designed by veterans for veterans. Our first success story isn't a statistic. He's a man who found his way back, and a dog who never gave up. She gestured toward the edge of the crowd, Lieutenant Nolan Hayes, and Ghost. Nolan exhaled, then stepped forward. His boots met the grass with certainty. There was no limp now, just caution, like a man learning to trust the earth beneath him again. Ghost walked perfectly in step, not on a leash, not under command, just with him. Each step drew applause. Some clapped out of routine, but others, fellow veterans in wheelchairs, staff who had watched him tremble through his first day of therapy, even a young soldier who had sat in a group session beside him in silence, all clapped because they knew how far 40 paces could feel. Halfway to the podium, Nolan glanced down. Ghost looked up. No bark, no sound, just eye contact, understanding. And in that moment, the war in Nolan's body, in his sleep, in his silence, didn't win. He did. When they reached the podium, Nolan paused. The mic sat there, waiting. But he didn't need it right away. He scratched behind Ghost's ear, then cleared his throat. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," he began, voice slow but steady, "that I had to erase everything before I could move forward." He looked toward Emma, standing near the back. "But it turns out healing means remembering without fear." He rested a hand on Ghost's head. "This dog, this soldier, reminded me of who I was when I stopped seeing it in myself. He never asked me to be okay. He just stayed." Nolan's voice cracked just slightly, "And when I couldn't carry myself, he waited until I could." Silence fell heavy after his words, but it wasn't empty. It was full, like everyone was holding something precious in their breath. He stepped back. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was deep, felt, earned. Ghost sat at his side, ears perked, eyes scanning the crowd, not out of fear, but vigilance, purpose. For the first time in years, Nolan didn't feel like a man being honored. He felt like a man living. After the ceremony, a little girl approached with a bouquet of sunflowers. She was no older than 6, wearing a red T-shirt that read, "My dad fights invisible battles." She knelt beside Ghost. Is he a hero? Nolan crouched next to her. He's the reason I'm here, he said. The girl smiled and handed the bouquet to Ghost. The dog sniffed it gently, then nudged it toward Nolan with his nose. It was, in every way, a full circle. There's something about the way he walks now, not fast, not slow, measured, present. Each paw step deliberate, as if he's not just walking through the world, but anchoring it. Ghost, once a shadow fading into corners of a kennel, now moves through hallways with purpose. The Veteran Center in Tucson. A man sits on the floor, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. He hasn't spoken in 3 days. No one can get close, not therapists, not family. But Ghost doesn't ask permission. He approaches quietly, body low, no pressure. He sits 3 feet away, lies down, waits. 10 minutes pass, then 20. Finally, a shaking hand inches toward him. Ghost doesn't move, just lets the fingers rest gently on his fur. No words are exchanged, but something unspoken begins. The Women's Trauma Unit in Phoenix. A former canine handler paces the room, trapped in a loop of memory. She flinches when doors close, refuses to sleep during thunderstorms. Ghost is brought in not as a show, not as a trick, just as presence. He rests beside her chair, eyes half-lidded, body still. When the storm begins, she panics, breath ragged. Ghost doesn't flinch, just scoots closer. His body brushes her boot. That's all it takes. She doesn't stop shaking, but she stops being alone. A shelter in Yuma. Rows of kennels, dogs bark, whine, retreat. One pup, a black lab mix no older than a year, cowers in the corner, eyes wide, ribs visible. Ghost approaches the kennel. He doesn't bark, doesn't growl. He sits, stares into the shadowed corner. Minutes pass. The pup takes one trembling step toward the light, and another. By the end of the hour, their noses touch, one through metal bars, the other through memory. Ghost is not a certified therapist. He holds no degrees. He earns no paycheck. But his presence earns silence where chaos lived. His gaze grants grounding where panic once ruled. His story, the one carved into his scar, stitched into his quiet, reminds others, you are not broken. You are still becoming. At community events, he wears a vest. Canine companion, ask before petting. Kids still run up, too fast, too loud, but Ghost never startles. He plants his paws, drops his head, waits. One child with autism buries his face in Ghost's neck. Another presses their hand against Ghost's scarred shoulder. No flinching, no retreat, just warmth. Emma watches him from afar sometimes, at a shelter, at a park, at the VA center. She marvels at how this once silent creature has become a bridge between fear and trust, grief and healing, isolation and return. He's not a ghost anymore, she whispers once, tears stinging. He's present. Nolan sees it too, not just the work Ghost does, but how he carries it. There's no arrogance, no pride, just stillness. A dog who no longer flinches at doorways, who lies across the feet of strangers until they feel the earth again, who doesn't demand healing, but mirrors it, nudging trembling hands, sitting beside broken men, reminding them in silence, you're still here, so am I. At night, Ghost returns home. He pads across the porch, curls up at the edge of the couch. Nolan sits beside him reading. Emma brings tea, barefoot, humming softly. They don't always talk. They don't need to. Sometimes healing speaks in the language of breath, in the thump of a tail, in a scar that no longer burns but bears witness, and sometimes in a shelter far away, a dog trembles in the dark. A staff member places a worn blanket inside the kennel, and ghost scent faint but present lingers in the threads. That dog pauses, sniffs, lies down. For the first time, it sleeps. Ghost has become more than a story, more than a rescue, more than a scar. He is what remains when survival becomes service, what endures after fear dissolves. He is not the ghost who disappeared. He is the ghost who stayed. The porch creaked gently beneath their feet, worn wood softened by time, and stories told in silence. The day had burned itself out over the hills beyond Nolan's property, bleeding gold and rose into the sky, as if even the sun knew how to say goodbye gently. Emma sat cross-legged in the wicker chair to the left, her mug warm in her hands, but untouched. Nolan leaned back on the wooden step, elbows resting on his knees, boots unlaced. He was quiet, but not absent. And Ghost lay between them. The old German shepherd had stretched out with the ease of someone who knew he wasn't needed to guard, only to be there. His chest rose and fell slowly, one paw twitching every now and then as if he were chasing a dream softer than the ones that used to wake him. For a while, no one spoke, because this wasn't a moment that needed to be filled, it needed to be felt. A breeze lifted Emma's curls. She tucked one behind her ear and finally looked over at Nolan. "Do you remember what the vet said that first week?" He gave a quiet chuckle. "You mean after he'd tried to eat through the exam table?" She smiled. "She said, if he pulls through, it'll be a miracle." Nolan nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, and if I pulled through, it'd be a second one." Ghost shifted, as if reacting to the words, letting out a long breath, almost like a sigh of agreement. A comfortable silence returned, stretched between them like a well-worn blanket. Then Nolan spoke again, voice low, rough around the edges, but clear. "I thought we lost him." He looked down at Ghost, one hand drifting to the dog's fur. "Turns out he was finding his way back to us." Emma blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. She reached forward without thinking, her fingers brushing Nolan's and then Ghost's ear. The three of them stayed like that, hands and paws and breath in rhythm. No camera captured the moment. No reporter would write it down. But some things aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be kept. In bone, in breath, in the place behind your ribs where real things live. The sky turned from peach to purple. Crickets began their nightly song. The wind whispered through the trees, not with urgency, but with peace. Ghost let out one final sigh and shifted his weight. Then slowly, gently, he rested his head across both their feet, touching them at once, as if to say, "You don't have to walk alone anymore. I'm here. You're safe." Emma placed her hand over Nolan's, and Nolan didn't pull away. In a world often defined by chaos, division, and noise, the quiet loyalty of a dog can remind us of what truly matters. Ghost's journey from a forgotten shadow in a shelter to a symbol of healing, love, and second chances speaks to something deep within us all. The need to be seen, to be believed in, and to find our way back home. German shepherds, like Ghost, aren't just working dogs. They're protectors. companions, mirrors to our courage, our wounds, and our will to recover. Their silence holds more truth than words ever could. Their loyalty doesn't waver, even when the world does. This story is more than fiction. It's a reflection of the many real animals waiting in shelters, misunderstood but not broken. It's a call to look closer, wait longer, and love deeper. May we be more like ghost resilient, patient, present, and may we, like Nolan and Emma, learn that healing is never a straight line. Sometimes it comes on four legs with amber eyes and a heart that never gave up. Because the ones we save often end up saving us.